My name is Nate Baumsey. I'll be the first and third speaker for the affirmation Nueva. I'll give a brief off-time roadmap. I'm going to start on some definitions, counterfactual, and framework, and then I'm going to move on to the advantages. Please feel free to call slow or clear when necessary. Time starts on my first word. So proud to affirm. First, defining what exactly the kingpin strategy is. The INFOSLIDE dictates that it is attempts to arrest or kill leaders of criminal groups, exemplified by the recent killing of Mencho, the leader of the CJNG cartel. First, on some counterfactual analysis. We believe that the alternative to the kingpin strategy is not doing nothing to prevent drug trafficking. It's how was happening before Claudia Sheinbaum. This is mostly demand-side responses in partnership with the United States. This looks like things like Operation Last Mile, where the Mexican government worked with the American DEA to increase border security against American drug mules who were carrying 86% of fentanyl being brought into the United States, as opposed to the United States DEA, which primarily focused on foreign drug mules, and thus were unable to actually curtail most fentanyl trafficking. 3 reasons why this is the alternative and why both don't exist in the same world. The first is financial. That the Mexican government spends tens of millions of dollars on these decapitation attempts. There is a direct trade-off here with the money that they're spending on other forms of drug trafficking prevention. 2 is going to be on ideological. Specifically, we think that Claudia Sheinbaum has signaled an ideological shift away from working with international partners towards just working within Mexico. We believe that, on an ideological level, pushing away from this internally focused strategy signals a renewal of the internationally focused strategy of her predecessor. 3 is going to be organizational. Basically, you only have a certain amount of personnel that you can allocate to these different operations. We believe that when you're pulling people away from organizing decapitation attempts on kingpins, you're pulling people towards other forms of drug response. Then finally, just empirically, this is true. Like, Operation Last Mile ended in 2024, which was the exact year that Sheinbaum got elected and started implementing the kingpin strategy. This is what the return is. This is the counterfactual that's happening in this round. Then, on some weighing mechanisms, we think that the round should be evaluated under a framework of global net benefits. The resolution doesn't ask us whether it's effective or good for the state of Mexico, but rather to compare the aggregate harm versus good to the world. Okay. First advantage is going to be on backlash. 1 here. When states engage in decapitative strategies against leaders of organized criminal groups, cartels respond. 3 reasons. A is deterrence. They want to make the decision calculus for the government much harder to go after these organizations by engaging in chaotic violence that destabilizes the government and deters its primary sources of revenue, like tourism, for example. B is unification. They want to attempt to demonstrate that the cartel is still unified. Again, I'll explain what happens when they don't do that. And C is literally just purely revenge. These cartels tend to operate on a very strict honor system whereby the killing of one has to be paid for by the killing of another. Go ahead.
Are you aware that after the killing of Mencho in February 2026, that this response we're expecting was actually not seen by any organization within Mexico?
2, after Mencho was killed, the CJNG cartel began implementing narco blockades, which were armed roadblocks in Jalisco. Almost 100 people were killed, mostly civilians. The business and the airport were closed. There were bombings in the streets. They were literally burning people. They were burning houses. They were burning entire streets to the ground. This is just, I'm sorry, factually untrue. 3 is on spillover. A, these cartel groups operate in dozens of different countries. The CJNG cartel operates in 40 different countries throughout South and Central America. Yeah.
So when you said 2 originally, was that your second contention and now you're on your third?
No, that was my second point under the first advantage.
Okay, got it.
This is the third point under the first advantage.
Thank you so much.
B here under spillover is that Guatemala is escalating its military presence in the border regions. This is one of the main countries that the CJNG operates in other than Mexico in anticipation of destabilizing violence coming across the border from Mexico. That means that there's a spillover effect when we see this increase in gratuitous backlash because other countries begin to experience this destabilization. We also see a risk of miscalculation whereby one gang member could kill a gang member from a rival gang in Guatemala, which then starts this cycle again and spills over into more countries. The second advantage is on splintering. 1 here is that like when we see the leader of La Familia Mencho was arrested, the gang splintered, which led to massive gang wars throughout their turf. A couple of things to keep in mind here. A is that one gang wins these wars. These wars, unfortunately, don't lead to the ends of the gangs. When that gang wins the wars, they exact retribution on the members that left. But B here is that this actually improves their control. Their smuggling gets stronger. Their smuggling gets worse for the world because they re-entrench their street control through these acts of gratuitous violence that they commit during these sort of gang civil wars. C here is that, again, they commit these acts of gratuitous violence. This is the more proximal impact here, that they are attempting to demonstrate their brutality to convince the members of the gang that are undecided to follow their half of the, again, essentially civil war here. 2 here under the second advantage is going to be that when Sinaloa split after El Chapo was arrested, a couple things happened. A is that the Sinaloa cartel bombed gas stations, morgues, civic centers. They were attempting to destroy civil life. B here is that homicide doubled in the region in question after this split in the Sinaloa cartel. cartel, but again, the Sinaloa cartel is still around a decade later. This didn't collapse the cartel, this merely made their violence worse and thus made them stronger by making their violence more evident to the general population. 3 here is going to be on better approaches. Why is the counterfactual a better world? A couple arguments. One is more seizures. Again, the United States DEA, because of the way citizenship works, like naturally, you're going to be more focused on surveilling those who aren't citizens of your country, which means that Mexico is specifically key to preventing American drug mules who, again, traffic 86% of the fentanyl that enters the United States. A couple warrants from this Operation Last Mile that Sheinbaum canceled in favor of the kingpin strategy. A, they seized 3,300 American drug mules. B, these drug mules were carrying 7,000 pounds of fentanyl, which is 44 million pills, enough to make 193 million lethal doses. Sorry, did you say POC?
Yeah, was that the start of your third contention?
This is the first point under the third contention, yes.
Thank you so much. Could you repeat your tagline for me really quickly?
For the third contention?
Yes,
the third
please.
contention is better approaches. The tagline is more. The tagline for the first point is more seizures.
Thank you so much.
Okay. The C subpoint here is that they seized 91,000 pounds of methamphetamine, and the D subpoint here is that they seized $100 million in cash that these drug mules were carrying. 2 here is going to be that improved collaboration increases chances of diplomatic solutions. Most fentanyl entering the United States comes originally as precursors from Chinese labs that then go through Mexico and are then trafficked by these drug mules into the United States. When Claudia Sheinbaum signals a return to the internationalist approaches to stopping drug trafficking, that means 2 things. First, that means that she's signaling that she's more likely to take a similar approach to the earlier step, i.e. the prevention of precursor chemicals coming in from China, but secondly, that she's more willing to again engage in this collaboration with the United States, which we've already empirically shown is extraordinarily successful. There's no other way for fentanyl to enter the United States other than through Mexico, and the reason why, again, 86% of these drugs were being carried by these American drug mules is because the United States working alone wasn't enough, because American drug mules could take the drugs instead of Mexican drug mules. On the impacts here, there's 70,000 deaths in the United States from fentanyl every year, plus tens of thousands around the world. Like, we think it's pretty intuitive that when we are seizing more drug mules, when we're engaging in effectively these demand-side operations, it's pretty clear that the supply side doesn't work for all the reasons I described in the first 2 advantages, but we think that there is a clear solution that's empirically worked in the past. Claudia Sheinbaum moved away from it. We are suggesting that she moves back. I look, you don't have anything else. You good?
I don't know.
Okay, sure. Increased internationalism between Mexico and the United States in drug trafficking means that the United States is probably able to be less hostile to Mexicans trying to enter the United States. This probably leads to a cyclical improvement in relations between the 2 countries, which makes further collaboration more likely and also makes Mexico more likely to prioritize American border security and American drug trafficking security. This is another independent reason why Mexico, beyond just the original signaling reason why Mexico is more likely to take action against the precursor chemicals coming in from China.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the order for the speech is going to be observation on Gov's top of case, firstly, then 3 op contentions, then responses to Gov contentions.
Remind us of your name too, please.
Ryan Jakubowski, first and third for op.
I'll be Stephen Blanco, the second speaker for opposition.
Okay, so like I said, I'll be starting out with top of case. We'll start on the counterfactual proposed by side government, because this is where I think they have a really skewed understanding of the ground. They basically say that they want to do another strategy of going after gangs, because obviously this is kind of like their plan. Their strategy is to work with America. 2 reasons why this is a completely ridiculous proposed by side government. First of all, gut check this. Who's the president of America right now? Trump. President of Mexico, Sheinbaum. Trump is a right-wing, borderline nationalist, populist president. Sheinbaum is a left-wing president who's been combative with Trump. This is not the same situation we've had in past decades. Look at the situation. But secondly, don't just take my word for it. Look at what happened in the past when we had a left-wing president in Mexico doing this with Trump. It was AMLO, who was also the left-wing Morena government leader. What did he do? He tried to work with Trump, but it didn't work. Trump demanded Mexico spend more money, so their argument of saving money doesn't actually hold up. And as a result, the partnership kind of fizzled out. Not officially, but it functionally stopped working. In addition to that, look at the warrant for this. Sheinbaum and AMLO are from the same party. They're functionally very similar presidents. Yet Sheinbaum still changed her approach because AMLO's approach wasn't working. 40% of the country was engulfed in gang violence. That's the world they tell you they want. It is worse in their world by every empiric possible. Don't let them try to gain offense on this. Now we'll move on to our case. Our contention 1 is on effectiveness in fighting cartels. Subpoint A is that Sheinbaum is the right leader. Someone is going to fight the cartels in Mexico. maybe not to the same scales we're seeing today, maybe not tomorrow, but it's gonna be sometime in the future because the amount of violence is unsustainable and most people in Mexico are mad about it. What's gonna happen? In the gov world, where 40% of the country is engulfed in gang violence, we don't have a solution. What's gonna happen is Mexico's gonna elect a right-wing dictator like Bukele. That's gonna be worse for the world as a whole, more human rights abuses, an even worse approach to fighting gang violence. We have to fight it with the right leader, and Sheinbaum, for all of her flaws, is probably a bit better for human rights than the next right-wing dictator who takes advantage of the chaos and anger people feel and wins that election. Yeah.
Why would Mexico elect a right-wing leader in response to Sheinbaum returning to AMLO's strategy if they elected Sheinbaum in response to AMLO doing the exact same strategy?
Because Sheinbaum won, first of all, mostly for economic reasons. What I'm saying is that we have a 20-year period of increasing gang violence. You're going to get a right-wing leader at some point, like we had in El Salvador with Bukele, who ran and won decisively on that exact platform. Now, subpoint B is on this, is that this disrupts the chain of command in cartels. This is the effectiveness assessment. Why is this working? When you target the leader and you have critical operations that take out the leaders, it's the best way to do this, right? Because the leaders have the most information, they know who they want to target, they know everything, and they know the people they want to go after. When you take out the leader, it's hard for the chain of command to operate because often these cartels, once you get past the top, are a bit more disorganized and are more bottomed down. So, there's also another argument here is that the military presence is deterrence. You have militaries going around and seeking out leaders of cartels. They can't recruit people as consistently. What's happening in the past is we have areas where the U.S. and Mexico concentrate on fighting cartels in one region. You have another province that's entirely untouched. What does that mean? In that province, there's free recruitment going on everywhere, which means the cartels last longer. They have a bigger chain, and they're able to kind of continue expanding like a disease. Subpoint C is that these risks are worth taking, right? The fact of the matter is that the killing of Mencho, there's a bit of clash on this. They characterize it as like having this massive spike in violence. And we can see that violence continued after the killing of Mencho the same way it did before. But the fact of the matter is that per CNN, there was not the huge spike of violence that they're telling you happened. These killings and firebombings, yes, remained happening, but they were already happening before. That's why they killed Mencho and he was their top target. Because there already was that violence coming from that gang. More importantly, what I want to say is that gangs don't have this incentive. Yes, they are loyal to the leader. Once the leader dies, the gangs often are more focused on who becomes the next leader than punishing the Mexican government in any way that's somehow organized. Contention 2, improves foreign policy. Subpoint A is on relationships with America, right? The fact of the matter is Mexico is economically reliant on America. 80% of their exports go to America. They're reliant on them for a ton of goods. This is just, I think, pretty clearly true. Right now, the U.S. is pretty upset with Mexico, especially as government is with the influx of fentanyl and the other concerns about Mexico's ability to handle gang violence. Trump is obviously very harsh on Mexico. We believe that insofar as we prove that this is, at least in the post that looks effective, it's better. Why is this better in the short term? Because Trump, really cares about seeming like you're doing something. He cares about, making it seem as though you're making a change. Whether or not the strategy is even a good strategy, it looks like you're doing more than you were doing in the past, which means that Trump's going to have better relationships with Mexico, the U.S. is going to have better relationships with Mexico, less likely to have tariffs and sanctions, better cooperation, which turns their counterfactual anyways. So you have better relationships with America. Subpoint B is on soft power. Mexico needs to lead the effort in Central America and Latin America for fighting cartel violence, right? Look what happened in Venezuela. That country has had a lot of problems with it. El Salvador, I think you can all agree that their approach, for all its minor successes, is pretty terrible and horrifying on the global stage. It's better that Mexico leads this, which means Mexico's going to gain soft power and it'll be better for the world as a whole, their framework, because you have a better, not compassionate, but a slightly better leader leading the charge and showing the model of how to actually implement the kingpin strategy, as opposed to being Bukele and El Salvador, which is the status quo, their status quo. Their status quo prior to recent years. Subpoint C is on sovereignty. The United States right now does not respect the Mexican military. Trump has been very belligerent towards Mexico. We believe that if Mexico is able to do this effectively, which they've been doing in recent years, at least more so than 2018, again, we don't claim full sovereignty, we just claim that our world is better than 2018 or 2020 or pre-Sheinbaum. That is going to result in, especially in the long run, America having more respect for Mexico's sovereignty. Contention 3 is on domestic incentives, right? And what we would tell you here is that basically, basically, the incentive here is subpoint A is increased peace, right? We've already given you the deterrence argument, and that basically the argument here is that the police presence, the military presence means that there's going to be more peace and less of an incentive for people to join gangs. Why is this the case? When you create a culture of just being fearful of the army and the police, people are less likely to want to become gang leaders, right? In the status quo, people become gang leaders because they don't think they're going to be held accountable, right? No one wants to end up being killed or shot or in a Mexican prison, right? So when you create a culture of fear from these police leaders, there's more deterrence in the long run, which is going to create increased peace. Subpoint B is on better outcome. We believe that decreasing violence is a prerequisite to liberalization, right? Mexico is liberalizing. It can be better, but it's liberalizing right now. We think that when you have decreased violence, when you increase stability, when you increase cohesion in the country, you get more liberal institutions, which is better for the world, a better democracy, I can't take it, and overall, a better Mexico, which is what we all want. Now we'll clash with the government's use case. Okay, so their first contention here is on backlash. They tell you, they give you basically this argument that when you kill the leader, it's scary and that they're going to react. First of all, this is a ridiculous argument. No, that's hard, but like this is just silly, right? Because if we're saying that backlash is just uniquely true, it exists in either world. So then basically the argument is don't kill the leaders or don't go after the gangs. Because no matter how you respond, no matter how you kill them, they're going to get mad at you. They're not going to be like, well, we hate the kingpin strategy, so we're going to get mad only when you do this. When you do this strategy, we're not going to be mad at you at all. They're going to be mad no matter what you do. So maybe don't live in fear. Do what you have to do to take care of your people and kill the gang leader with the most effective way to do it. So that's just the gist of this contention. That's all we would say. Secondly, again, I think the characterization of this is kind of cherry-picked, right? Like the argument that like violence had this massive spike just isn't true. Yeah, it was still violent, but like it's going to be violent no matter what. You just have to decrease the violence over time. Their contention too is on splintering, right? What we respond is that, yeah, good that they're splintering. We are not claiming that when you kill a gang leader, the gang disintegrates after one day. What happens is you kill the gang leader, and like we tell you in our contentions, from the top down, the gang gets more disorganized, the chain of command is destroyed, and the communications are worse. So what happens is exactly what Gov tells you. The gang splinters, they are unable to carry out the same operations at the same level of preciseness that they were able to in the past, and they fight amongst each other. That's good. Is there violence in the short term? Yeah, but in the long run, it's easier to take out gangs. On their contention 3, these are better approaches. Again, we tell you that their approach just doesn't work. See the top of case observation, how this will not work with Trump. Thank you.
Okay, so, hello everyone, my name is Kevin. I'm going to be the second speaker for the affirmation side for the Nueva team. For a quick off-time roadmap, I'm going to go onto framework, including counterfactual stuff. I'm going to go onto our opponent's case, and I'll end up on our case. Sound good? Great. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. First, let's look at the counterfactual analysis. Our opponents tell us that this counterfactual is ridiculous right now because Trump is going to be president, and Trump isn't going to want to do any deal with Mexico to combat these demand-side issues for cartels. We're going to say that this is untrue for 3 reasons. Firstly, as our opponents tell you themselves, Trump is harsh on Mexico. This doesn't mean Trump is harsh on the Mexican government. Trump is harsh on Mexican cartels. Trump will do anything he can to stop fentanyl from coming in America. And what this means is collaboration with Sheinbaum and the government, Mexican government, to stop demand-side issues because this has been proven empirically to be the most successful type of operation against fentanyl smuggling into America. This is happening historically. This is what's going to happen in the status quo, if not for Sheinbaum's current strategy, which will do more harm than good. Second response to this is that fentanyl smuggling into America is going to be really, really bad for Trump's ratings. So even if he, ideologically doesn't support Mexico, he's still going to do whatever it takes to stop Mexico from coming into America, because 70,000 people still die every year in America, and it's bad for his approval ratings. And thirdly, we're going to say that this is just most likely because it was historical. Immediately before Sheinbaum was elected, this is the operation that was happening for like 2-3 years. So this is like the most historically accurate warrant. Our opponents don't tell us another counterfactual, so we're just not going to buy any. Sure.
Do you think that under AMLO, when Mexico was, your characterization, collaborating with Trump, it was the Mexican military that was stopping the flow of fentanyl into America?
Yes, the Mexican military.
Can I finish? Or was it the U.S. Border Patrol, which was getting increasing funding, doing the exact same thing?
It was the Mexican military. The Mexican military was doing raids on compounds from their side. They were stopping American citizens who were smuggling fentanyl from coming in and getting fentanyl from that region. It was the Mexican military supported by DEA intelligence. Okay, so let's go into our opponent's case. Firstly, on the point about the right-wing leader. So the counterfactual was the previous president's strategy, and Sheinbaum, his ideological successor, was elected. It was popular and successful. So our opponents are just wrong here. Okay, on our opponent's second thing about kingpin strategy being effective. Let's go down these sub-points one by one. Our opponent's first sub-point tells us that the chain of command breaks down and these gangs no longer are successfully operate. We're going to say that this is not true. Cartels currently operate on the hierarchy strategy, as in they have a second boss and a third boss. They call these capos. These capos know as much as the kingpin does. After they split into their separate gangs, these people serve as the new kingpins. They know just as much as the previous kingpin. No operations break down. They still operate. But don't just by me talking at you, by the empirics that says the Sinaloa cartel, even after they split in 2016 with the arrest of El Chapo, still exists today. The second subpoint, our opponents tell us that recruitment is less likely if these gangs are split. We're going to say that this is not true. When a gang is stable, they don't need to look for new recruitment. When a gang is unstable, as in they're fighting a turf war with their former compadres, they're going to try to recruit more members to increase their turf and increase their recruitment to fight that gang war, because people are more expendable. The third subpoint, our opponents tell us that violence was already happening before. We have 2 points on why violence gets significantly worse under the affirmation plan. We're going to say that firstly, this is specifically called backlash by these gangs. After we arrested El Mencho, the gang specifically called this backlash. They were literally doing riots in the streets specifically for backlash. This was gratuitous violence in the name of gratuitous violence. They weren't fighting for turf. They were literally fighting against police and killing civilians as a show of force against the Mexican government. But secondly, we're going to say that intra-gang wars are specifically bad. The cartel doesn't want to kill people in the status quo. All they want to do is sell drugs. Under the affirmation where they basically decapitate the kingpin, what they're doing is intra-gang violence. These previously, combined gangs are separated into other gangs that are fighting for turf. This means gang shootouts in the streets. This means bombing of gas stations. This is significantly worse violence than what's happening in the status quo because combined gangs and structured gangs don't want violence. Thirdly, our opponents tell us that Trump is harsher on Mexico. We're going to say that this is absolutely true. Trump is harsh on fentanyl coming from Mexico into America. This means that Trump does whatever it takes to stop fentanyl, and the empirically successful solution was Operation Last Mile, as in working in collaboration with the Mexican government to stop the demand side issues and the supply side issues. The supply side, combating supply side issues doesn't work, and it's proven not to work. Our opponents tell us that U.S.-Mexico relations are going to be better in the status quo and moving forward. So this is just not true. Mexico-U.S. relations have deteriorated because the current Sheinbaum strategy does not work. It does not rely on any sort of international cooperation, and she is failing to actually secure violence in the region. Look towards the fact that between 2016, which is when the Sinaloa cartel disbanded into the two groups, and 2019, the region where the Sinaloa cartel operates saw a double number of homicides from 6 to 12 per 100,000 people. Sorry, I just took one. Next, our opponents tell us that Trump is belligerent towards Mexico. Aside from the fact that this contradicts with the first thing our opponents said, we're going to say that Trump is belligerent towards Mexico because the current strategy doesn't work. Fourth, our opponents talk about domestic incentives. Our opponents tell us that if there's a culture of killing gang leaders and being violent towards gang leaders, then people don't want to become gang leaders. Two responses to why this is untrue. First, backlash disproves. We're going to say that gang leaders didn't cower behind their compounds after El Mencho was arrested. No, they went out on the streets and killed 700 civilians in a show of force against the Mexican government because they have basically paramilitaries that are trained to combat the police and do riots, carry out gratuitous violence in public. And secondly, we're going to see that people that have been in a gang their whole lives and are literally trained and groomed to become the capo, the next kingpin of the gang, is going to be scared by the previous gang leader being taken away. They're probably happy about it because they get to be the next capo and fight it out in a gang war. Okay, going on to our opponents also tell about the better institutions. Okay, sure, whatever. Okay, going on to our case. So on our first contention of backlash, our opponents give us one response here. Our opponents tell us that if you're going to go after cartels, no matter what you do, they're going to be mad. So under what the affirmation is saying, we might as well just not go after the cartels. This is not what we're saying. We're saying that the alternative, the counterfactual here, is going after demand side issues, as in the fentanyl coming into America instead of killing the kingpin of these groups. Previously, during Operation Last Mile, we didn't see a doubling of homicide rates in a region where a cartel was splintering. We didn't see gratuitous crime happening in the streets. We didn't see 700 civilians dead because of backlash in the streets because this was effective. It stopped the drug mules from getting into America. That's why it's called Operation Last Mile. And this is empirically successful as well. Just look towards our warrants that our opponents didn't combat. This is 3,300 drug mules that have been thrown in jail, 7,000 pounds of fentanyl, which is 193 million lethal doses. This is 91,000 pounds of methamphetamines, and this is $100 million from these cartels that have been lost. But you don't see any headlines in the news from 2022 to 2024 of gratuitous violence happening in the streets and 700 civilians dead because we weren't targeting the kingpin of these cartels. That spillover specifically happens because of backlash. Spillover into other countries like Guatemala specifically happened because of backlash, because of things like miscalculation, where one gang member accidentally starts a conflict with another gang member. This is all the more likely under the plan, under Sheinbaum's plan. So we don't want to do this. But I'll also extend the fact that, just extend El Mencho. This is probably going to be the best warrant here because this just happened literally last month, where 100 civilians were killed in one night on a riot from the streets, and 700 civilians died because of backlash. This is just not true. Under demand side, combating this just didn't happen. On our second contention is of splintering. Our opponents tell us that these gangs don't deteriorate in one day, but they also don't splinter. Our opponents tell us that the chain of command is destroyed. This is not true. The cables just split into separate gangs. The separate gangs still have operating chains of command. What they do is these gangs form smaller gangs and they fight with each other for turf. What happens here in the status quo, as my partner explained, is that after these gangs finish their gang war and one gang comes out on top, they increase their territory. They strengthen their control on the region because they had a whole gang war and they learn more about like street level dynamics, and they basically improve their territory and control over that territory. So by that, both gang war happens, which is really, really bad for the people in the gas stations that are getting bombed or the people in the streets that are literally seeing gunfights every day. But secondly, by the fact that when the big gang comes back, it's going to be worse than the previous gang because they tighten their control in the region. And thirdly, just on further counterfactual, our opponents conceded the fact that Sheinbaum was literally the person who ended the strategy of demand-side attacks and the fact that demand-side attacks were successful. Sure. Okay, by the neck, thank you. Or Apple, sorry, by the neck.
Okay. Thank you so much for a great speech. Do you have my phone? I'm sorry. Yeah, that's great. Alright, side government, are you guys ready? Judges? Wonderful. My speech with 8 minutes will begin on my first word. Good morning, everyone. My name is Steven Blanco. I'm here alongside my partner Ryan Jakubowski today in strong opposition of the motion. I have an order about how I'm going to go through the speech. Firstly, I'm going to make an observation on the counterfactual analysis that we've been disputing at the beginning of this round. Then I'm going to go into the opposition case, show you why you should be voting for opposition at the end of the day, and show you why the government team's contentions are so flawed that you simply can't vote for them at the end of this round. So firstly, on the counterfactual analysis. This is something that we've been disputing since the beginning. Trump has always been super harsh on the Mexican government. This is the first point that they say. They say Trump isn't harsh on the Mexican government at all. That just because Trump and Mexico don't really like each other, that doesn't mean that he's not going to be harsh on the Mexican government. He has vehemently said that he dislikes Sheinbaum. Also, the partnership with AMLO, as we've warranted with you in my partner's first speech, is completely mischaracterized. The government also tells you here that fentanyl in America is bad for Trump. Of course, we agree this is obviously bad for any sort of president. And they say that Sheinbaum has an historical precedent in order to work with Trump and to make relations better. The government tells you that the United States and Mexico work together and that this had a 100% success rate and that it was automatically good because they have one warrant, and that one warrant that they give you throughout this entire debate, Judge, is that Mexican troops did the raids. They said that the past policies have helped because Mexican troops were the ones that did the raids. Yeah, of course Mexican troops are the ones doing the fighting in either world. In either world that you have, either side government or side opposition, you're going to be having Mexican troops coming into these drug cartel kingpins and fighting them, arresting them, or killing them. What's happening on side opposition is that the point is that the United States, who did a majority of the fentanyl trading, of the control of the borders, was actually happening from the United States, which is why Trump was so mad at Mexico, because the United States was doing so much of the heavy lifting. Look at our warrant about how Mexico is the one doing it in either world. In our world, Mexico is the one doing more of the heavy lifting, and that's why relations will actually get better under an opposition world. So now, with my moving on into the rest of my speech, the first contention that we give you on side opposition is about effectiveness. This is the most effective way to fight cartels. Our first point that the MGC responds to, they tell you that that under this contention, cartels operate on a hierarchy strategy, that operations don't break down when a cartel kingpin gets taken down. They say when a gang is stable, they don't need recruitment, and that violence gets worse in the opposition world. Firstly, on the point that cartels operate in a hierarchy strategy, yes, we agree, there is a hierarchy strategy. They give you the example of the 2 or 3 backup leaders that they have, but when those 2 or 3 backup leaders go away, that means that you have a power structure that is inherently broken down. They say that there's always constant kingpins, everyone's being trained in, but can you physically imagine that we have millions of cartel members let's take their example, the Sinaloa cartel. We have millions of cartel members that are immediately ready to take over the cartel as soon as the drug kingpin is taken down. Obviously not, judges, because they operate on a power hierarchy, because they have a power structure, not every person under the kingpin is going to have that same ability to rise up. Even the ones closest to the kingpin don't have all the secrets of the cartel. They don't have all the legitimacy, they don't have all the agency or capacity to be going around doing the same missions, going around and spreading all the drugs, you know, they don't have the same capacity that the drug kingpin does as the government is trying to frame it. Their second point, they say when a gang is stable, they don't need recruitment. Of course, we think that it is in the cartel's best interest at all times to be recruiting more members. Like they said, the gangs care a lot about territory, so of course they're always going to be trying recruitment. This is a direct clash with one of our points that we give you about domestic benefits, and we think that you should flow this to the opposition side at the end of the round. Their third point and final point here under contention 1 is that violence gets worse in the opposition. They say that there was backlash as a show of force. Again, gangs are always going to recruit. The government's characterization that the gangs only recruit when they feel the need to expand is not true. And the government says, oh yeah, violence goes up from 2016 to 2019, so clearly the strategy doesn't work. But this is where they lose the debate, judges. Clearly, this is where they lose the debate, because Sheinbaum wasn't in 2019. 2019 was the government team's world. 2019 was the government team's world, and that is the warrant they give you. They give you that in 2019, that's when violence goes up. Sheinbaum had not taken office in 2019 in the warrant that they give you. It was AMLO who was doing their strategy. So if we want to take them at their word, at face value, the warrants that they give you support directly side opposition's first contention and their case. They should lose the debate right here. They just told you it doesn't work. Don't believe them, and don't give them a chance to respond to the PMR. Again, our second contention doesn't really get addressed, but they do give you some responses on Trump. They say supply side regulations aren't going to work, that on Mexico and United States relations, they say that the Sheinbaum strategy doesn't work. In 2018, Sheinbaum had more homicides in Sinaloa. Again, this warrant goes conceded to opposition because Sheinbaum wasn't in 2018. This was again the AMLO government. And our second contention, to remind you judges, which didn't really get signposted, is foreign relations. The drops that we have here on our second contention are that Mexico leads the way with Latin America and on soft power for the Mexican government. If the Mexican government is seen as strong because they're fighting cartels, of course they're going to gain soft power in Latin America, regional power, regional agency. That's going to be very beneficial for the people, improving quality of life and respect for the Mexican government as a whole. The point is that in the government world, El Salvador leads the way. In the opposition world, it's Mexico that begins to take the lead, and that is better for the entire world. Our third contention is on domestic benefits. Again, some of the clash they give you here, they say gang leaders didn't hide in private and that they shot up the streets. Firstly, gang leaders are going to be mad and violent at the Mexican government in either world because the Mexican government is opposed to what they're trying to do. The government is wrong for two reasons. Firstly, cartels won't be okay with the counterfactual approach the government made or at the opposition approach. The clash, judges, is whether gangs are uniquely mad when you kill the kingpin. Of course they're going to be mad in any world, but they have yet to prove that they're going to be uniquely mad at killing the kingpin. Now, with my remaining time, I'm going to go over the government's contentions and show you why you simply can't vote for them at the end of this round. Firstly, what they tell you on the MDC, the government ballots, their first contention is on backlash. The responses that they give you to our refutations are that the alternative is going to offer demand side strategy, and they give you the warrant that 3,300 drug mules were thrown in jail in the government world, and then they extend the El Macho thing. Again, the warrant that they give you here, they're capturing drug mules. We can still capture drug mules. Of course, our strategy is on kingpins, but it is so much easier to get drug mules who aren't having a significant impact instead of the kingpin who is running the entire operation, judges. That is where we are going from. If we want to truly take down cartels and we want to splinter, like they're saying in their entire second contention, let's move on to that, by the way, on splintering, they say that the chain of command is fine, but then they also want to say that they're splintering and that they're separated and that the chain of command is so broken up that they're having civil wars over territory. It is a direct contradiction on their part, and they cannot have it both ways in their world. They say that gangs are going to increase their territory on civil wars even though they're breaking up. So let's look at this in base value, judges. The cartel is breaking up. They're fighting each other, and then they're somehow gaining territory from territory they didn't have. If they're fighting on their own territory, if they're fighting on their own land, how do they even gain territory? Of course, they're actually going to lose territory because they've now split into two different groups. This point doesn't make any sense on side government. And then lastly, their third contention is on better approaches. They don't give any real responses to our refutations here, so I'm going to extend the refutations that we give you in my partners for speech. We agree that Mexico is crucial to stopping drug cartels, which is why we have to vote opposition. As we already show you in my partner's top of case observation, 40% of the country is engulfed in gang violence in the government world. All of the warrants they give you are from when AMLO was using their plan, not Sheinbaum. They give you points about how more drugs will happen in the op world, but they just say past policies were better, even though AMLO was the one enacting them, not Sheinbaum. For all these reasons, I hope you vote for an opposition ballot at the end of the day. Thank you.
Let's see, Alright, he goes for a great round and deliver the closing speech for said opposition. Okay, so the order, it's actually honestly, a pretty simple speech. I'm just gonna do, the speech is literally just gonna be taking you through the points of clash in the round, and then I'm gonna signpost each point, say what point it is, and then I'll do some weighing under each point, so then my op's gonna win. Okay, so yeah, just really points of clash. I'll start my time now. Point of clash 1 is which way is more effective. This is basically the heart of the debate. And the good news for us is that you can basically not believe a single thing me and my partner say, but vote for op just off this alone. Why is this the case? Because they literally win our case in the MGC for us. They tell you, in 2016, 2019, we did this trap, we did, this attack on a gang, and violence spiked in this area, right? This strategy in 2016, 2019 was literally their strategy. AMLO was president, they were working with America because Trump was president in 2019, and Sheinbaum was not even in the picture. Look at the warrant they gave you throughout the MGC in its entirety. Sheinbaum was not president. This is their strategy. They also concede our case in a second way when they tell you in their MGC again that cartels are splintering and fighting, and that creates more violence in the short term, which is bad for the people. Two reasons that this is winning for all. The first is that even if we buy their premise that violence is somehow spiking after we do the kingpin and it fractures gangs, it's chaotic, let's say that we just accept that to be true, even though it's not, right? If we accept that to be true, weigh this long term, just on magnitude, in the long run, you're gonna prefer that to their world. Why? Because a week of violence, a week of horrific violence, which no one wants, is unfortunately necessary because the gang itself gets destroyed, which they concede, which is that it gets fractured, it's less powerful in the long run. So yeah, at best case for them, you get a week in the spike of violence, but it's worth it in the long run, which is why the strategy has been being used. Again, China wouldn't be using the strategy if it was just, creating chaos. She has political incentives, right? So clearly, this strategy does work, that's why they do it, and at best for them, we get a week of violence. But more importantly, we tell you that the violence happens in either world, yeah, people are angry when you kill the kingpin, but they're not just gonna not be violent when you target them. And if their approach is as effective as they want you to believe, where they're arresting people, doing raids on these towns, and killing and taking away fentanyl, they're gonna be angry no matter what. So they kind of can't have it both ways here. And I think this is their whole first contention of a backlash. Yeah, there's gonna be backlash, as there is when you do anything to hold people accountable. You have to do it. The question is, which way do you do it? And they can't say our world is good because we do it without also having backlash. Because if you're not having backlash, let's face it, you're not being effective at it. The point of clash 2 is which side is better historically warranted. This is similar to the first one, but I think just unwarranting because they don't let them make a new characterization of the PMR, right? Look at our warrants. We tell you, why was Trump mad at Mexico in the first place, right? It is because, from his perception, the United States was doing the majority of the heavy lifting there and fighting dealing with the fentanyl crisis and the border, right? Trump was mad because he did not respect Mexico's ability to contain, or he did not respect AMLO's ability to contain, the gang violence in the northern part of the country. That carried over. Sheinbaum is also not liked by Trump, right? Because she's also a left-wing leader, but at least she's doing something different which we're learning can be effective, which is why, by the way, Trump has not sent the military to Mexico, even though he said he would. He has not done the things he said he was going to do, which is a warrant for why. Clearly, we have a better characterization of what's happening in the status quo. We have a better understanding of what happened under Trump, and we ultimately do give you more warrants.
Point of order,
for
pause time. This argument that Trump doesn't follow through on his stated threats, doesn't send the army to Mexico, et cetera, is new in the LOR. This should have been brought up earlier in the round.
Can I say why this is not new? So we have the warrant for this. We have, at top of case clash dating back to LOC, we tell you that Trump's favorite towards Mexico is uncombative, that he's threatened to send the military in. We also tell you that China's strategy is broadly effective, the 40% engulfed in violence under AMLO, not happening anymore, American troops not in Mexico, clear extension of that.
Judges will take it under consideration.
Thanks so much. I'll start my time in 1 second. So yeah, and again, another historical warrant that I'm glad I got reminded of. In their world, 40% of the country was under gang violence. That's a stat from 2019. They can see this. They can't respond to the PMR. That has decreased now, right, by a pretty significant amount, and that's why part of the reason why Sheinbaum is so popular. Okay, the third point of clash is what is better for Latin America and broadly the world, right? This is kind of the foreign policy argument. And this is where op is winning remarkably cleanly on the biggest impact of the round. Because as much as we care about Mexico and fighting gang violence there, the round ultimately by the framework is to be decided on international implications. And they drop basically everything we tell you here. We tell you, getting back to our first speech, that in Mexico, someone's gonna have to fight, right? These cartels. Someone's gonna have to fight the cartels. Either we get a right-wing leader like Bukele doing it 20 years from now, or we get Sheinbaum now. I'd rather have Sheinbaum, and I think we all would, right? So ultimately, the op world of Mexico leads the way. We have the Sheinbaum model of doing this. We don't arrest 5% of our population and torture people, right? Obviously, there's some violence, but it's more concentrated and more precise, which is better for everybody. In their world, we have the El Salvador model that they lead the way, and we have less of a cohesive thing, and also Mexico liberalizes this point gets dropped, which is better for the entire world. On those drops, you're voting on.
Good speech. The order of the PMR is going to be sort of overview and counterfactual stuff, and then 3 voter issues. Everyone ready? Time starts on my first word. The overview for this round is extremely simple, but also extremely important as to how you understand the worlds that have been presented to you. And it boils down to one sentence. Methods of preventing drug trafficking are not monolithic. The way that we characterize the round to you is that there is a trade-off between 2 approaches to preventing drug violence and drug trafficking. The first is a supply-side approach. This is the kingpin approach that is predominantly characterized by Claudia Sheinbaum. The second is a demand-side internationalist border security approach that is predominantly characterized by AMLO. But the very important thing to keep in mind here is that every leader sits somewhere on this spectrum. So while AMLO was predominantly internationalist, he engaged in kingpin decapitations too. This is the Sinaloa warrant in 2016. And yes, we argue that when a president who is mostly good engaged in the type of action they advocate for, it led to a doubling of murder rates in his home province. The resolution is not asking us to compare presidents, it's asking us to compare policies. And when it's asking us to compare policies, and the empiric failure of one policy and the empiric success of another has been clearly presented across different presidents, then when you're being asked to compare those strategies, the answer is clear. On the counterfactual, they tell you that we do both preventing drug mules and going after kingpins. But they drop the 3 reasons I give you in the PMC as to why these don't happen at the same time. This is the financial cost, the ideological trade-off between being domestically focused and internationalist, and the organizational trade-off between literally what programs your personnel are working on. So we know there's a trade-off here. They also concede that it is most likely that the counterfactual is a return to this internationalist approach, because they explain to you Trump's influence, and Kevin gives you the analysis in the MG that goes cleanly conceded that Trump's concern is not about gang violence in Mexico, it's about fentanyl being smuggled into the United States, and thus that Trump prefers the empirically best solution to stopping fentanyl trafficking, which is, in this case, Operation Last Mile. They concede that Trump has the leverage to force Mexico to return to that, even if Sheinbaum doesn't want to, because Trump cares about population more than ideology. So, the first voter issue here is international backlash. We think there's 3 reasons why you're not voting on it. The first is that there's no implication to international backlash. They try and backfill in the LOR, but really they don't give you any particular reason why it matters if Mexico is seen as strong or seen as weak. Secondly, they concede what Kevin tells you, that Mexico looks weak when backlash increases and murder rates increase. They've cleanly conceded that out of the MG, which means you're not buying that Mexico looks stronger. And finally, their internal link is through the election of a right-wing leader, which they concede is impossible because the counterfactual was predominantly, although not entirely, the previous president's strategy, and his ideological successor was elected, which proves that that policy, predominantly, was popular and successful. So there's no right-wing leader getting elected if a left-wing politician led to another left-wing politician on this strategy. This is, extended word for word from the MG.
I'm telling it a little differently. I'm just going to raise this for the judges. So in LOC, we obviously make this argument that you're talking about. The response that the right-wing leader can't be elected through these incentives is new, and this response would have had to come in LOC because we gave you the El Salvador example. Never gets responded.
Quoting Kevin word for word, the counterfactual was the previous president's strategy, and Sheinbaum, his ideological successor, was elected, which proves that it was popular and successful.
Again,
We're in an office flip.
I'm quoting judge's discretion.
No, I'm sure you said. I just think it's a completely different argument, but it's up to the judges.
Okay, I'm going to resume my time now. The second voter issue here is violence. We think that we're cleanly winning violence for a couple of reasons. First is that we give you the analytic reasons why violence increases uniquely when we go after kingpins. This is the deterrence argument about changing the government's calculus, the argument about trying to maintain unification, even though that often fails, and the arguments about revenge and honor killings. Secondly, we think that we're pretty clearly winning under splintering when we explain to you about how gratuitous violence happens after these gangs occur. They tell you that they're solving in the long term because splintering proves that gangs weaken. I'll explain why that's not true on the third voter issue, but they concede that fundamentally, at least in the short term, gratuitous violence spikes. They also concede the empirics that in Sinaloa, after the arrest of El Chapo, murder rates doubled. So we're pretty clearly winning on this question of violence. And finally, on the question of trafficking, which we think is the biggest issue in the round because it's the only issue that's actually been terminalized down to a final number of deaths. This is the 77,000 fentanyl deaths that we read to you in the PMC. 2 reasons why you're voting for us on trafficking. The first is that the counterfactual solves better. They just cleanly concede that the counterfactual prevented 193 million lethal doses of fentanyl from entering in the United States, as well as all of the international links that tell you that Mexico, following this strategy, prevents the importation of Chinese precursor chemicals. But second, and most importantly, on splintering, gangs do not weaken.
I apologize, I called it a little bit late. I don't believe you guys used the number, the statistic of preventing 190 million deaths.
It's
It's not
193 million.
lethal doses, 77,000 deaths in the United States, and tens of thousands more around the world. This is from the PMC.
I remember the 77,000 in the second number you presented, but
I
That's fine. I read,
literally
it's fine. I read 193 million lethal doses in the
yeah,
PMC.
that's all
I
right.
assume it's on your
I
list.
apologize if I may have missed it on the floor.
You're good. Okay, resuming time now. They tell you that splintering leads to weakened gangs for 2 reasons. The first is that they lose territory, and the second is that they don't have strong hierarchies. But again, Kevin explains to you, they don't have millions of capos, they have 2 or 3. And even if those capos don't have the full picture, they have enough to create a splinter group from those cartels. More importantly, we tell you that this empirically happens. We give you the warrants of the La Familia Michoacana gangs, as well as the Sinaloa gang. But finally, they tell you that these gangs get weaker because they control less territory, but they concede the argument I give you in the PMC that gets extended through the MG, that these gangs increase their street-level control through these acts of gratuitous violence, which enables them to have stronger control over drug trafficking, even when located in a smaller area. Because of that, we think we're pretty clearly winning.
Alright.
Right.
Great round of applause. Judges, would you like to